The real story of the Miami Heat Big Three isn't about rings, about super teams, or even just LeBron James. It's a story about pressure, about expectations, about failure, and how one of the most talented teams ever assembled nearly fell apart before they ever reached the top. This is the real story of the Miami Heat Big Three. To understand the Big Three, you have to understand what came before it. LeBron James was the chosen one in Cleveland. Dwyane Wade was already a champion in Miami, and Chris Bosh was quietly dominating in Toronto, putting up crazy numbers on a pretty bad team. And all three of those players had one thing in common. They were stuck in their situations. LeBron continuously could not get past Boston and the super team they had with the Celtics. Wade was battling constant injuries and season-ending injuries and surgery. And like I said, Bosh was putting up elite stats just on a really bad team. But the 2010 offseason changed everything. Not just for the Heat, not just for those three, but the entire NBA landscape changed. On July 8th, 2010, LeBron James announced on a live ESPN special called The Decision that he was leaving the Cleveland Cavaliers and joining the Miami Heat, team up with Chris Bosh and Dwyane Wade. LeBron James, Dwyane Wade, and Chris Bosh didn't just join forces, they announced they were going to win multiple championships together. So when the 2010-2011 season started, it wasn't about if they would win, it was about how fast will they dominate the league. But that 2011 season did not start the way they would have expected it to. The Heat started out 9-8, and people started to question a few different things when it came to this roster. The chemistry was off. Nobody knew the hierarchy of the team because Wade was the guy. He was the franchise star. He was the fan favorite. LeBron was the superstar and best player on the team. And Bosh had to adapt from going to number 1 to number 3 on the totem pole. And that was a big issue for the entire team, especially the three guys that you're relying on. Even the basic things looked off. There was a lot of spacing issues, ball dominance issues with who was going to take this shot, who was going to finish the play, who was going to have the ball in certain moments. There were so many small things that having three number 1 guys on one team had to figure out. Who was going to sacrifice? Who was going to take a back seat? And because of that narrative, the critics ate them alive. But there was a turning point for the Heat, as it was very much needed to get things going in the right direction that everyone expected out of them. It was reported at one point during the season, the Heat players held a players-only meeting to discuss internal issues, chemistry, and roles within the team that were kind of just elephants in the room. And after that meeting, LeBron became more aggressive, the offense was more fluid, and things started to become more structured, and it just came together a lot better on the offensive end. And defensively, it was night and day difference for the team. And that's where they went from can this work to they are legit contenders now, not just three guys looking to out-talent you every single night. The Heat then finished the season 58-24, wrapping up that second half of the season very well, going into the playoffs on a good note, carrying that momentum to the first round where they beat the 76ers in 5 games. No issues there. Games were a little close, but they still were able to get it done. The next, they head into the Celtics series where LeBron and Wade finally get a chance to overcome the team that's held both of them back from succeeding in the playoffs. The Heat beat the Celtics in 5 games in dominant fashion and putting their stamp that there's a new team to beat in the East, and it's not the Boston Celtics anymore. Boston just didn't have any answer for the Heat, and I think the age was starting to catch up to them, and this was the end of the run for the Celtics, or at least the beginning of the end for them as well. The next series, the Heat run into the MVP of the season, Derrick Rose and the Chicago Bulls, who did finish first in the East that year and were on a roll as a team. This was a big series for the Heat because this was the best team in the East record-wise. They had the MVP in Derrick Rose, and the Bulls were on a roll, and they had arguably the best defense in the NBA at the time. They just were a tough, gritty team, and Miami was the physical, fast-paced team, so it was bound to be a great series. The Bulls end up stealing game 1. LeBron and Wade don't have the best game. Bosh ends up with 30-9, which is a great stat line from your third option, but it's the first game. And typically for LeBron teams, game 1 is always the fill-out game. It's the game where he has to understand what to do. And I think that shows with what happened next as they win the next 4 games in a gentleman's sweep and just dominating the Bulls. There were some close moments and close games, but at the end of the day, the Heat showed they were the superior team with the superior talent, and the Bulls really couldn't match up with them. What stood out in that Chicago series was the Heat's defense, as Chicago really couldn't get good looks. The offense was horrible. Guys couldn't get in a rhythm, and LeBron was taking the challenge of guarding Derrick Rose in fourth quarters. And with him being on Derrick Rose and Chicago not really having other creators from the guards position, it was pretty hard for them to get good looks in the fourth if Derrick Rose wasn't creating some heroic shot or play. And it just looked very sloppy down the stretch of games for the Bulls. With them beating two of the toughest teams in the East, both in 5 games apiece, the Heat were the clearest day favorites going into the finals against the Dallas Mavericks. And this is a big topic that I want to cover in this video because a lot of things are overlooked, not talked about, and there's a lot of memes about a few players in this series that, yeah, they're funny, but I want to get the facts straight on this Dallas Mavericks team because they weren't just some Cinderella story that, just happened to fall into the finals. The Mavericks were a very well put together team defensively, and they maximized every single possession on offense. But obviously, when you have 3 so-called superstars or 2 superstars and a star on one team, obviously you're going to have them as the favorite in any series that they go into. The Heat win game 1. LeBron and Wade put up good performances. The team continues on to the pace that they were going to into the finals. Game 2, the Mavericks ended up stealing that. Dirk had a decent game. Not really the best from the field again, but you gotta let the shots fly in the finals, especially as the number 1 guy. LeBron had a pretty high turnover game. He started to struggle with the Mavericks defense a bit, and later in the series, we'll get into exactly what they were doing, what changed. Dwyane Wade had a great game too. He had about 36 points and was just hitting shots everywhere. And the shots that the Mavericks wanted the Heat to shoot, Wade was hitting. A glaring problem for the Heat was just the bench scoring. They got 11 points off the bench and 9 of them from one player in Mario Chalmers. Moving on to game 3, the Heat ended up bouncing back and taking a 2-1 lead in the series. And in this game, you get 29 points from Dwyane Wade, who just was completely dominating these first 3 games. You got 18 and 17 from Bosh and James. Again, LeBron, you definitely expect a little bit more, but the issues that this team ends up running into are things that are addressed later down the road, as he offensively just never looked comfortable in this series. And even in the parts of the games that they won, he just did not look comfortable out there and deferred to Wade a lot. Game 4 is where everything changed, and all the jokes and the memes and everything that people get off now start to begin. This is where I want to change the narrative on the Mavericks were just some lucky team that just happened to fall into the finals. The Mavericks, from top to bottom, were smart players who played together with a great organization and head coach that knew how to win. The biggest adjustment from the Mavericks was going from man-to-man when LeBron was in the game to zone. And early in LeBron's career, zone was very difficult for him, as he wasn't the greatest of shooters, did not trust his shot the most, and it was just his kryptonite. Anytime he got the ball, they packed the paint, sat on the elbows, and just dared guys to shoot. And when you needed LeBron to get a couple buckets, get some rhythm, get things going, momentum swings, he just wasn't really able to get to the spots and get the kind of shots that he wanted because of that zone. It was about a 2-3 kind of matchup zone, and it was the perfect scheme to stop LeBron James. It was not some man-to-man JJ Barea locked him up, as people like to say. I want to go over the real facts of what happened. That picture that floats around of JJ guarding LeBron on the post, it's funny. It's whatever. It's a meme. But the reality is the Mavericks stopped him with a team effort. Not one guy, not someone locking him up. It was a great team effort and great adjustment by whoever made the call to go to the zone, because the Mavericks knew they couldn't keep up. And even though LeBron wasn't getting 35 and 10, Dwyane Wade was having a field day against the Mavericks. And the reason why he was able to have a field day is because the Mavericks' first initial scheme was forced mid-range shots. Because initially that's what a lot of teams did to LeBron, was make him play the mid-range. Because he was streaky from 3, and he was obviously a great driver. So what do you do to guys who are good on the outside sometimes and are elite driving to the rim? You make them play in the mid-range because it's an awkward middle ground for them. And Dwyane Wade excelled because the shots that they wanted LeBron to shoot, Dwyane Wade was taking them. In game 5, you get a decent game from Dwyane Wade. Only took 12 shots. And I think a big part of that is they were trying to get LeBron going. As he took 19 shots, he had a 17-point triple-double. But again, it was just sloppy. It was just not really the LeBron that we know now and what he turns into be, because he had to learn how to win. He was a superstar who had a glaring weakness, and in an NBA era where zone defenses were allowed and there was no such thing as illegal defense, you could just pack the paint on and it took out a lot of their game. And in game 6 to close out the series, the Mavericks end up winning that, obviously. Winning the series 4-2 and 3 straight to close out the series. And this put a lot of pressure on the Heat, and a lot of conversations, uncomfortable conversations, began to be had because of the way the series went. LeBron and Wade had 21 and 18 respectively, but in a desperate game, in a game where you're down 3-2 and you gotta just let it fly, it definitely was not what you were expecting out of those two. But again, this highlights the issue that they didn't know who the guy was. They were both being passive on who the guy was. There wasn't any hierarchy. There wasn't any system. Both of the guys were trying to make the other guy the guy on the team, and it just caused major identity issues for the team. But that summer, all of that changed. In the summer of 2011, it was reported that Dwyane Wade and LeBron had a conversation about who was the guy and what needed to be done for them to be successful. And in that conversation, Dwyane Wade pretty much told LeBron, you got to be the guy. Wade knew it, that he had to take a step back and let LeBron take reins of the team if they wanted to win and live up to the expectations that people had placed for them and that they also placed on themselves. LeBron was really just trying to play the role and not, overstep Dwyane Wade's team, his franchise, as he went to Dwyane Wade's team. And I think in doing that, you really didn't get a full LeBron James. You got a more passive, not really aggressive at all times like he was in Cleveland, because he just didn't want to step on Dwyane Wade's toes. And by Wade saying, we need you to be who you were in Cleveland for us to win, the reign of LeBron James begins. After a summer of being heavily criticized, the Heat and the superstars on the team, people going crazy over the not one, not two, not three quote, and the media just having a field day with the Miami Heat pretty much every day. There are reports of some locker room frustrations and roles and pressure and some front office decisions that apparently almost happened but didn't. I don't know how true those are, but after the loss to Dallas in the finals in the previous year, the Heat weren't just trying to win. They were just trying to prove that they were as good as advertised and that this wasn't a failure. This wasn't a fluke, and it was going to come together. But in that season, the Heat finished 46-20. It was a lockout year, so they only played 66 games, and that was good enough for second in the East. And the Big Three and the team in general finally established a lot of the holes that they had in the previous year, including offensive roles, and creating a consistent structure from day one to the end of the season. And like I mentioned earlier, this is the beginning of the LeBron James reign. LeBron had an MVP year, averaging 27, 8 and 7, finishing first team All-NBA, first team All-Defense, and top 4 in Defensive Player of the Year voting. Not only was he becoming dominant on the offensive end, but he was also showing the defensive prowess as well, and putting his stamp as the best player in the league at the time. And I think this is when LeBron really began to embrace the villain role. As that first year, I think he did struggle a lot with being so hated after leaving Cleveland and the whole, hate for joining the Heat, which I don't really understand, because if we're being honest, the first super team was not the Miami Heat. It was the Boston Celtics, who LeBron, Wade, and Bosh teamed up to take down. It wasn't as if there wasn't a super team that they just decided to do. The Boston Celtics were a super team. Let's get it straight. And to wrap up the regular season, the Heat go into the playoffs, winning the first 2 rounds and running into the Boston Celtics in 2012 again. And this was a series for the ages. The Heat go down 3-2 in the series, and the questions, the concerns for is this team going to be together if they lose this series, as they just beat Boston the year before in 5, the pressure really kicked up for this team, and some guys really needed to step up. And this is where you get the legendary game from LeBron in Game 6 at the Garden, where LeBron just completely dominated the game, putting up 45 and just hitting ridiculous shots. Easily one of the greatest games of LeBron's long career, and the Boston Celtics players themselves said there was literally nothing you could do. And from the Heat's teammates' perspectives, they said he came into that game ready to go, not talking, no joking. He was locked in for the game, and it showed. In that Game 6, they ended up blowing out the Boston Celtics, forcing it to 7, and the Heat end up closing out the series in 7. And in Game 7, you get 35 and 7 from LeBron, who really just put his stamp on the series and wanted to show the world who he really was, and all the things that the media were constantly on him about weren't true. And then after the Heat beat the Boston Celtics in 7, they meet their next challenge, a very young and athletic team who were hungry out west. And that was the Oklahoma City Thunder, with Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Serge Ibaka, and a 6-man James Harden. This was the time for the Heat to redeem themselves and to shut up some narratives about the stars and their careers, legacies, and for once, the critics shut up. Again, the Heat lose Game 1. Oklahoma City holds down home court, but that was the last hope and glimpse of winning that the Thunder would have for the rest of the series. In this series, LeBron focused a lot more on playing out of the post. It wasn't him just focusing on drives, and I think from last year's perspective, a lot of teams tried to copy what the Dallas Mavericks did, but he fine-tuned his game and matured a lot losing that series, and the same weaknesses that he had the previous year were no longer the same, or not nearly as much as weaknesses as they were a year ago. The losing that the Heat went through made them who they were afterwards. The Thunder were just too young, the Heat were too physical, and obviously the Heat win the next 4 games. LeBron gets his first championship, Bosh gets his first championship, Wade gets his second, and all the narratives can finally die down about LeBron, about the Heat, and a lot of the pressure that was once there is now gone. LeBron wasn't the guy who collapsed and was a choke artist and who couldn't win and succeed. He was the guy who won MVP, All-NBA First Team, 3rd in Defensive Player of the Year voting, and now NBA champion and Finals MVP. LeBron put his stamp on the league and put the critics to rest, but would have to do it again next year to keep him silent. And going into 2013, they did exactly that, finishing the 2013 season 66-16, just continuing the dominance based off the last year. And during the season, they had a 27-game win streak, which was good for the second best record at the time. You have your 3 best players all make the All-Star game, and LeBron wins back-to-back MVPs for his 4th one, and should have won Defensive Player of the Year. Don't even get me started on the whole Marc Gasol Defensive Player of the Year award thing. That was just for old heads who didn't want to see LeBron pass certain people that we won't talk about today. What made the 2013 team so special was they mastered, by this point, almost all of their weaknesses. They had great perimeter shooting, Battier, they have Mike Miller, Ray Allen joins the team. So you have a plethora of guys that can shoot. Chalmers was in and out. LeBron shot 40% from 3 that year. And defensively, they were menaces. They could switch 1 to 4. They were athletic. They got in your shirt. They were physical. Mentally, they were tougher. You couldn't shake them like you once could. And everything just came together for the Heat. Chris Bosh really developed into a solid defender for the Heat after being a huge offensive guy in Toronto. Over his 3rd year in Miami, the development of his defensive game had really changed a lot, and that's not something that people really discuss. Is the development arc of Chris Bosh's defense was humongous for the Heat. And the addition of Ray Allen gave the Heat so much gravity on offense, The lanes opened up a bit more. You couldn't zone them as much. It wasn't as effective because you have the greatest shooter of all time at that time on the team now. And the Heat really adapted to that 5-out small ball kind of offense. Chris Bosh began to develop the outside game as his 3-point attempts and shots were starting to creep up pretty slowly as he developed into that stretch 5 that became critical for the Heat at times. And like I mentioned, that 27-game win streak, the Heat just made every game look easy. They were really just having fun. At times, it looked like they weren't even trying. And LeBron just became this ultra efficient point forward who had literally no weaknesses at the time. He was shooting the 3 well. He was obviously already a great driver. And he just really established playing the point guard role for that team. Maybe not on paper, but he was the initiator of the offense and was the engine and ran everything for that team. And they were so good that they looked bored half of the time during their games. The Heat go on to win the first 2 rounds pretty easily, with the first round sweep and the second round against the Bulls going to 5. And then they run into the emergence of the Indiana Pacers and their superstar Paul George. I will say, as a Heat fan growing up, the Pacers scared me every time we played against them. And Paul George was someone who, out of respect, I hated when we played against him. That series was pretty much just alternating games. You win one, I win one. You win one, I win one. And it just went back and forth until the Heat won in 7 games. It was a great battle between the emergence of Paul George and LeBron James continuing to dominate the East, but you could definitely see at that time the Pacers were the next up-and-coming team, and they had a top 5 two-way player in Paul George who was dominant on both sides of the ball, and his offensive game really took a leap that season. But the biggest story of the year is the Heat versus the San Antonio Spurs. I just did a video on the Spurs and Tim Duncan, if you want to go check that out after this, talking about the dynasty of Duncan and the Spurs, as I don't think people realize how successful and crazy their dynasty and Tim Duncan's career in general was. But anyway, we go into game 1 of the series. The San Antonio Spurs take game 1, and you get an 18-point triple-double from LeBron, but not really the best scoring night for him. And it was just all in all one of those physical, sloppy games. The Heat take game 2 and hold down home court advantage here, picking back up where they left off previously. And LeBron didn't really have the best first half, but had a pretty good second half. And the Heat end up winning by 20 points in that game, heading into game 3. And game 3 in San Antonio was ugly, let me tell you. And Greg Popovich really showed why he is the king of adjustments when it comes to coaching. Popovich implemented a defense where pretty much Kawhi took reins of guarding LeBron. Everyone else kind of zoned up, boxing one sort of kind of defense. And again, this is what he went through with Dallas, but now you have Greg Popovich and Tim Duncan on the back line manning the defense. So now it was another series of chess that LeBron and the Heat had to play, because you're going against another mastermind and dynasty and the best defense in the league at that time, and it was a challenge for them. And not to mention Danny Green turned into Steph Curry, but that's neither here or there. The Spurs end up winning that game by 36, and that is a huge momentum swing for just winning on your home court the game before that. But they take it to game 4, and the Heat then still won at their place and even the series up 2-2. LeBron starts to figure out the zone and figure out Kawhi's antics and what he does on the defensive end, and was able to put up 33, only had 4 assists, so that shows how aggressive he really was in that game. And the Heat dominated them and put up 109 points, which against the Spurs, that's pretty good. And at this point, they're just trading blowout for blowout. It's just a chess series. And every time one coach, one player, one team makes an adjustment, the other one comes back and tops it. And nothing new happens. San Antonio ends up winning game 5 and takes a 3-2 lead on the series. And Miami is facing that wall again that they have seemed to hit every year in the playoffs. And the questions and concerns for the Heat start to arise again. But this game 6 is not only a legacy game for LeBron, but it ends up being a legacy game for someone else as well. And I just want to get this narrative straight with this game 6 as well, because there's a lot of bad narratives surrounding this game. And honestly, I'm just going to jump straight to this narrative. The narrative is that Ray Allen saved LeBron's legacy, and I want to give all the credit to Chris Bosh for the rebound and Ray Allen for the big shot he made. But LeBron had a 32-point triple-double, 3 steals, and a block. So yes, was that shot humongous, and do they win that series without it? No. But at the same time, LeBron was dominating that game up until that point and played 50 minutes in that game. Also got great production from Mario Chalmers, who his shot selection is just horrible. But if he's making it, let him go. If he's not making it, you got to take him out. But in that game, he was very productive. You got some big threes from Shane Battier in that game 6 as well. And Tim Duncan had a big game, but in the 4th and overtime, just missed some bunnies that he said really messed with him after not being able to close out that game in that series. As the people that worked for the arena were starting to bring out the celebration stuff because everyone thought the game was over. They started to tape off the court, the trophies were starting to come out, and next thing you know, the Heat turn it around and force a game 7. And in that game 7, the Miami Heat took care of business. LeBron controlled that game from start to finish and lived up to the pressure, and again silenced the critics that said he wasn't clutch, that he was soft, because this narrative till this day still follows LeBron, that he's not clutch and he's not this, doesn't show up in big games. And historically, that's not true. Shane Battier was huge off the bench in that game 7, had 6 threes. Chalmers and Dwyane Wade were both great in that game. It was just a great team collective effort, and LeBron led the charge with 37 of their 95 points, taking home the Heat's 2nd championship in a row, silencing all the doubts, critics, questions, comments, concerns, anything anyone had for that team, and looking to three-peat the following season. This is also a big part of the Heat's legacy that I want to discuss, because we get this 2014 season highly misconstrued. Going into that 2014 year, the questions about Dwyane Wade's health and his knees were really starting to float to the top, as he at times missed time and just over his career had a lot of little things come up, and his knees were really starting to become a problem in that last year. While LeBron was becoming a dominant star and putting his stamp on the league, and the Michael Jordan comparisons were starting to come into play. If he kept winning, kept getting MVPs, where would he end up with Michael Jordan? And the name started to be compared a little bit. The decline of Dwyane Wade really started to go downhill during this year, and it got ugly towards the end. This is the year that every team that played against Miami, it was game 7 of the finals. The Heat were looking to complete a three-peat, do something that rarely has ever happened in NBA history. And when you're doing things like that, you are going to get the best shot from every team, even the bottom of the league teams. And this is when certain players started to break down. You go to 3 straight finals, about to go to a 4th one. Your body breaks down. You're tired. You don't get the same summer breaks that you consistently were used to getting. With the winning and long playoff runs also comes fatigue, start to come into effect here. There were starting to be some surrounding questions around Miami. Could they afford to keep this team? The questions of, was LeBron planning to stay here after this year, started to rear up as well. The Heat finished the season 54-28, but you could tell, as with many successful teams, after you're successful for so long, you don't really take the regular season as serious. You rest more often. You don't really game plan and strategize. You kind of just win the amount of games that you need to get one of the top seeds. And from there, you just coast. But it wasn't just rest that they were sitting these players out for. There were some injuries and some small things that showed signs of weakness, and this thing was starting to crack a little bit. And that was a real concern for the franchise. And while all this was happening, the San Antonio Spurs were just waiting for their chance to prove that last year was a fluke. And if Ray Allen doesn't hit that clutch shot, Tim Duncan is 5-0 in the finals, looking to go 6-0. They met again in the finals, but this time the stakes were a little bit different, and a lot of the dynamics of these teams were very different. Dwyane Wade throughout this playoff run had been dealing with really bad knee pain and just fatigue, and had to do excessive treatments in that knee to even get on the court. And that led to LeBron having to do a lot of the work just because Wade wasn't the same athlete and wasn't able to keep up as he once was. And to this day, there's plenty of articles and videos that talk about how bad Wade's knees actually were that were kind of downplayed and kept hush so the team could just focus on the team. But his injuries were really bad, and this is where the downfall of his career began to start, I believe. Because as of right now, everyone looks at 2014 as, oh, LeBron should have won. The Heat, failed and they should have won the series, when there's a lot of missing context to that series. The Spurs pretty much had game planned for the Miami Heat and were more than prepared for them based on all the emotions of the previous year and wanting to get one more. The Spurs again put out a fantastic defensive performance, looking to load up on LeBron, have Kawhi play defense on him. But to be honest with you, this was LeBron at the peak of his powers or the beginning of the peak, and he still dominated the Spurs. His defense kind of lacked a little bit, but due to just the fatigue of going to the finals 4 years in a row and also playing against a masterclass of coaching and Popovich, eventually it does wear you down. And with Wade also not being to the peak of his powers anymore, LeBron had a lot on his plate offensively. LeBron in that series averaged 28 points on 57% from the field and 52% from three. He did not have the most assists, and again, this was really him having to carry in this series. And the Spurs, like I said, just put a masterclass down of shutting down his playmaking avenues, and guys just weren't making shots. And it looked like the end of the road was finally here. The next leading scorer after LeBron in the series for the Heat was Wade at 15 a game and Bosh at 14. But then after that, everyone else was under 10. And you're not going to win a series with your top guy averaging 28 and everyone else 15 and below, and only two of those guys being above double digits. And this isn't a knock to any of the teammates or Dwyane Wade. I was a Dwyane Wade fan before LeBron got there, but clearly his style of play over the years and early injuries in his career that he sustained and surgeries that he had eventually had caught up to him. And when you play and fall the amount of times that Wade did, it's bound to catch up to you at some point. So nobody was really surprised by that happening. It was just really bad timing, but he did try his best to fight through it. But I believe at the end of that series, everyone knew LeBron probably wasn't going to stay. Wade's health issues were a real concern, and obviously the talks of LeBron possibly wanting to go back home. Now that he had learned how to win, he succeeded somewhere else and wanted to provide something for the Cavaliers fans back at home, started to rear its head, and that eventually became reality for the Cavs. And my goal for this video was not to put down anyone. It wasn't to downplay certain people and say this guy just played bad, that's why they lost. I wanted to provide facts and context because LeBron gets a lot of slack for this series, and people don't realize how great Dwyane Wade was in those first couple of runs as well. But when your second guy starts to break down and you're going against the best defender in the league at the time in Kawhi Leonard and the greatest scheme coach of all time in Greg Popovich, you need your other guys. You can't beat them alone. And unfortunately, the downfall of the Heat wasn't because of talent or wasn't because there were teams better than them. It ultimately came down to health, and I think just the end of the road just being there. It was a great 4-year run. It was a great part of my childhood and a lot of other people. It was a great time, and they have been my favorite team to watch. But again, thank you guys for watching if you made it this far. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, any feedback you have for me, please leave it in the comments. I just started this channel back up. I took a 3-year break, so my stuff really isn't getting pushed out like that. So if you have any support you can offer, please do, and I will catch you guys in the next one.